Welcome to Dark Matter. Today I'm talking to three lovely ladies. We're here to we're here to discuss romance. So first off, we have Gracie on the left. Anne spent her childhood on the move when her father's job took them around the world. The gypsy life taught her that humour and love are universal languages, and that favourite books can take you home wherever you are. She's been spinning stories since she first sat in a sand pit and pinned down a pet for an audience. However, ordinary people didn't become writers. They were sensible and got real jobs. Anne wrote her first novel while on long service leave, backpacking solo around the world. Writing is now her real job. Published by Berkeley, USA and Penguin, Australia, Anne is a nationally best-selling author in the USA. She's also a former president and honorary lifetime member of the Romance Writers of Australia, a 5-time Rita finalist. She's twice won the Romantic Book of the Year, Australia, and National Reader's Choice Award in the USA. Her books have been translated into 16 different languages, including Japanese manga editions.
I forgot to bring one.
As well as writing, Anne has a lifelong interest in promoting adult literacy, which started when she was at university, and up until recently she kept bees. Perhaps that accounts for her stinging wit.
As sweet as honey.
In the centre we have Sarah Mayberry. Sarah is the author of more than 30 books for Harlequin, Mills and Boon. She also writes scripts for Australia's longest-running serial drama Neighbours and the Channel 10 one-hour drama Wonderland. She has always wanted to be a writer and has a Bachelor of Arts in Professional Writing and Literature from Deakin University. She's worked as a journalist and an editor, as well as in communications for a major Australian retailer, but she definitely prefers her day job these days. She recently won the Romance Writers of Australia Romantic Book of the Year Award, as well as the Ella Award for Novella of the Year. So welcome, Sarah.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
And next to me we have Kate Cuthbert. Now Kate has kindly agreed to moderate this panel because she's the expert in romance. Anyone who's followed Dark Matter for a while will realise I'm probably not the best person to be facilitating a romantic panel. Now Kate has quite a history. Before starting as managing editor of Harlequin, Australia's digital first imprint, Escape Publishing, Kate Cuthbert worked in genre fiction, children's books, mass market publishing, magazine, corporate and academic publishing. She was also a book reviewer with the Brisbane Courier Mail, all about romance, the New York Journal of Books and Bookseller and Publisher magazine. She absolutely loves that she gets to read romance for a living. So welcome, Kate.
Thank you. Thank you, Nalini, for hosting us today. I think in this, our first discussion, we'll actually talk a little bit about romance itself, and then we'll talk a little bit about where romance has been, the journey that romance took, and then where romance is today, and then maybe speculate a little bit on where we think that the romance genre will go in the future. Sound good?
Sounds good to me.
All right. Well, first of all, in a discussion about romance, because romance has so many different labels and different definitions, particularly when you think about historically, what do we mean when we're talking about romance in terms of genre fiction today? What are the rules? What is it that makes a romance a romance?
Okay. Well, from my point of view, it's a book which has at the centre of it a developing relationship between two people, and it must end happily. That's the crucial bit for me. There are lots of books that I would call romantic fiction, where that's where a relationship is central to the plot. But if one or other of them dies, it's not a romance. I would call that a romantic tragedy or something like that. There's a big difference between the CE and the IC ending in the word romance or romantic for me.
Absolutely, that's my definition as well. The happy ever after.
The difference, I suppose, between a love story and a romance novel.
Yes.
Well,
That a love story, I suppose it's the difference really between Gone with the Wind versus Pride and
Yep.
Prejudice.
Yep.
Where Gone with the Wind is a love story and romantic.
Yep.
In that Scarlett and Rhett's relationship is absolutely crucial to the
Yep.
story.
Yep.
But they don't end up together in the
That's
end.
right. Yes. Yeah.
Even knowing Scarlett O'Hara as we do, I'm pretty sure that she's going to go after him and get her man back. Without that happy ending, it doesn't really fall within that
Yeah, that's
genre
right.
definition.
Yeah, I think every time I see something described as a love story, then I'm fairly aware that it's not going to end well for one or other of the two people, and so I think, good, okay, stay there, because I want to read a happy ending.
It's funny that you say that because there's actually a core group of romance readers that always read the end of the book first.
Yes,
Because
to
they need
ensure that.
exactly to
Yes.
make sure that they're going to get that happy ending,
Yeah.
the ending that they actually want.
and also sometimes to make sure that the hero is who they think it is. I don't know if you've ever read one of those books where there's like a couple of people who, you know, like, and I have in later years got to a certain point and gone, oh, I'm just going to make sure he's on the last page.
Yeah,
I don't like this other guy so much.
Yes, yeah,
You need to make sure that you're emotionally investing in the
Yes,
right character.
I'm not
Yes,
going on
yeah.
that journey unless it's sort of going to a place I want to go.
And that's the important thing, because people say, well, why would you read romance when you know that from the the first chapter that it's him and it's her and they're going to end up together? And it's because of the journey. You know that they're going to end up, but you don't know how, and you don't know how the various permutations of the development of the relationship and the various stuff-ups that might happen and things like that. And you read for that journey, and you are emotionally invested. I agree.
But you're safe as well, aren't you? And that's
Yep.
that reader promise that we often talk
Yep.
about. We make a commitment to them that we may wring your guts out from A to B, but you will get to B and you'll be happy.
It's Luna Park. It's you might be terrified at various points, but you're safe.
And I think that really that's fundamentally if a reader isn't satisfied with a book, or if they don't like a romance novel, it's because that ending hasn't fulfilled them. It's because either they don't believe that the ending is possible with the various conflicts that have been set up through the story, or the characters haven't convinced them that they in fact can
And
create
deserve to
this
be together.
Yeah, exactly. Create this ending.
Yeah, because people, the people need to earn their happy ending, I reckon.
Absolutely. I'm just going to make a really quick note. We're talking a lot about heroes and heroines. Now, that was true for romance for a very, very long time. But
And it's still true from what we write.
it's still
Yeah.
very true for the people for the writers that we have invited to speak with us today. But romance itself has absolutely exploded.
Yep.
And it's not always heterosexual relationships anymore. It's not always pair bonds anymore. So whatever the flavor of romance that you're looking for, whether it's male, female, or male, or any other pairings that you can possibly think of, it's possible to find it in romance now.
Werewolf.
Female werewolf, as Anne has just said. It's possible to find that, and it's one of the things that I really like about romance, in that there's
It's all embracing.
love is love at the end of the day in romance.
And it's transcendent.
very broad-minded, isn't it? And,
Yeah.
I mean, when you see the way, well, I'm assuming it's a majority female readership has embraced male fiction. Like, it's huge. And I think that's really interesting, because it is the emotional journey that people are into. It doesn't necessarily matter what bits are attached to it.
Yeah, exactly. That idea that love is always a good thing. And love is always
But I
something
think
to be
it's
supported.
in the way that romance has always kind of pushed the boundaries of societal change. I think it's reflecting that too.
Absolutely, and that
But I'm not sure about how well we all respond to living with werewolves, but and vampires. But
that segues really neatly into the second thing that I wanted to talk about, which is, as you say, how romance has evolved from the beginning, and how it's always sort of been ahead of the curve in terms of cultural shifts, in terms of feminism, in terms of almost politically accepting what is happening in the world. when we look at, well, I mean, if we go back to that seminal novel that everybody talks about all the time, we can't go through Romance Writers of Australia conference without talking about Mr. Darcy at least once. But if you're looking at, Pride and Prejudice, Elizabeth Bennet should, by all accounts, leap for joy at that first proposal. She should be, turning backflips that she's going to be able to make this match, which is so incredible for the time, the disparate social classes that they're coming from, the chance to save her family, but she doesn't. She refuses to enter into a relationship where the inequality would be so great, because even though Darcy admits to loving her, he admits to loving her against his will. He refuses to accept
his better judgment.
Well, exactly. He loves her despite everything.
It's a grudging proposal.
It certainly is. It certainly is, and he deserves to be smacked and set away.
But I mean, if you look at that, if you follow the trace of romance novels through history, even moving into what we're talking about, Mills and Boon, because both of you have written for Harlequin, Mills and Boon. They started in the 40s where women had jobs. And then in the 50s, women still had jobs, even though culturally women were expected to give up their jobs and go back and create the happy home. Not in the novels. In the novels, they still had jobs. In the 60s, they had careers. In the 70s, I think this is one of the sticking points to romance, and it's certainly one of the things that gets brought up again and again in criticism of romance. The 70s, of course, is the era of the bodice rippers, when heroines not only had careers, but they also had sex, which was a massive shift, and again, following that cultural, I suppose preceding that cultural shift as well, that women could in fact be sexual beings and enjoy sex for reasons other than procreation. So, romance has just always pushed the cultural boundaries.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think a lot of it is because of the women who write romance. They have always been well-educated, intelligent, independent women, valuing those traits in whatever social construct they were living in at the time, and not giving in to, not being oppressed by their own sort of, the pressures on them to conform or whatever. And I think people, writers particularly, have always escaped through their imagination. And so they're writing, they're kind of idealising or writing the way they think it ought to be. So, yeah.
There's a certain amount of, when you think about the sort of expectation against female writers as well, there's a sort of subversiveness in a woman choosing to be a novelist in the first place.
That's very true.
Certainly back in the day of Jane Austen, but even into the 40s, etc., romance is frowned upon and considered lesser than. So to choose not only to try and write a book for publication, but to choose it in the hated romance genre, you're a little bit of a rebel, I think, and you're a little bit of a, I don't care what you think, I'm going to do what I like anyway. And I think that is probably what also comes through in the books as well, is that you kind of already kind of self-selected as a little bit of an outlier, maybe, particularly back then. Maybe not so much now.
Well, particularly, exactly, when women were apologising for having the temerity to put pen to paper, and
having men's names.
Well, I think there's a version of it now. I think that there's still an attitude that we need to apologise for writing romance. That why don't you write a real book? That kind of thing. So there's still that kind of lack of obvious approval of the choice of what we write.
Absolutely. Let's talk. I mean, we've talked about the general evolution. Let's talk about your personal evolutions. Can you tell me about the first romance novel that you ever read?
I didn't realise I was reading romance, and it was These Old Shades, Georgette Heyer, and I was 11. And I devoured all of Georgette Heyer. And I read, and my sister was a librarian, and I was one of those kids who just never had enough books to read. So she used to bring home a lot of the books that they were decommissioning or cancelling, whatever they called it. Georgette Heyer, Mary Stewart, Catherine Gaskin, all really old volumes. And then I went to uni and certainly didn't read romance. I'd never read a Mills and Boon. I would have scorned to read a Mills and Boon because, even though I had never read one, because everyone knows it's rubbish. And it wasn't until I had gone backpacking for a year and I came back with stuff written, handwritten in spiral back notebooks. And I went to a bunch of Christmas parties that year, and two friends who were writers, earning their living as writers, they're the only people I knew who were writers, both fell about laughing at my naive plan to become a writer and write fiction, and said in Australia the only people who can afford to write fiction and support themselves on it are romance writers. And I thought, oh, okay, I'll be a romance writer. And I thought it was going to be straightforward and easy. Everybody told me, these are people who are really experienced writers, and so they just said, oh, it's really easy, you just get a formula and you just write it. And I thought, oh, okay, they know. And it just started a whole journey in which I learned a huge amount, discovered that so many people were so wrong about romance, and that I started to read widely and discovered an incredible variety of romance, and a whole lot of writers who I just thought were wonderful stories that stayed with me, and I come home. I had absolutely come home. And I was coming home kicking and screaming for a while. I was thinking, this can't be right. Everybody says, but I had come home and I'm just haven't left, and I'm not going to. And you can kick and scream, and I'm staying.
And good for you.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, that's my journey.
Well, I'm trying to think what my first romance novel was. I read Anne of Green Gables, etc., which has got a really strong romance.
That's pretty true. Yeah. And Gilbert's a very classic hero.
He's a gorgeous hero. Yeah.
But we got, I think they were Sweet Dreams romance.
Oh, we had those too.
Yeah, and they're the first ones that I can really remember. I'm trying to remember whether
I discouraged kids from reading them.
Yeah,
it's really fun.
Didn't stop us.
No. Forbidden is always a good thing. Yes.
I'm going to interrupt your story for a second because I found Sweet Dreams, and my nana introduced me to Mills and Boons at the same time, and I would read the Sweet Dreams and be like, oh, well, that wasn't any good. You go get the Mills and Boons.
Well, that's what I was trying to work out, whether I had read, because my mother's mother had these hardcover
Mills and Boons.
I don't know that they were Mills and Boons. They were another romance publisher, but very much in that vein. And my father's mother had the paperback sort of, it would have been the 70s and the 80s. You know, the men all had sideburns and they were all smoking on the cover, and the girls all had mini skirts. And I just gobbled those books up. I don't know whether I was reading those and then I found the Sweet Dreams or not, but I just, and that was it. I was off and running, and that was pretty much all I was reading. And I can remember my uncle saying to me at one point, you should write one of those Mills and Boons, because like they're millionaires, those writers. I think he had a very inflated idea of that, didn't he? But it wasn't until I think I got through my university degree that I sat down and I sort of was like, okay, what do I want to write? And everything that came out was romance, and I realised that was where I wanted to be. But I had not read a single title romance, like a Susan Elizabeth Phillips or someone like that. I'd only read category up until in my early 30s when my editor sent me a whole bunch of single title books.
A whole other new world.
Yes. And it was.
It was the same way actually, because I read the Mills and Boon, and the ones in the library were hardcover and they were color coded. So blue ones were medical and pink ones were sweet, and then the red ones were the ones that I actually wanted to read, which were not as sweet. And I read all of those all the way up through high school. And
excuse me, for the uninitiated, what are the red ones?
Oh, Blazes, sexy. Yeah. all the way up through high school and into university. And it was my best friend, actually, because my best friend loved Nora Roberts. And one day we had the discussion, you know, I read romance. And she was like, oh my God, so do I. I'm like, okay, we could be friends. So I was reading the Mills and Boon because you can get through them a little bit faster. And when you're studying, they're a perfect study break because you could read them in about an hour and a half and you wouldn't actually like go out anywhere. So you get back to what you're doing. And she said, oh, no, don't read those. Read this one. And I thought, well, no, I don't want to read that. It's not red. It's not red, and I don't know what I'm getting into this book.
Where's the boss and the secretary? I need a boss and a secretary.
And that was my intro into single titles from there. So, but I absolutely started with Mills and Boon, and now I still read them probably about half and half, really. So
I only read my sort of particular authors though. These days.
Yeah, I think that's true as well. I don't read as broadly as I used to. And I still prefer the red ones. Can we talk a little bit about the romance community? Because I think we're all sort of dancing around the subject of being a part of the romance community and what that can mean as a reader and also as a writer and for the genre in general. We just returned from the Romance Writers of Australia conference, which is held annually and is certainly one of the bigger writer conferences in Australia, but it's also been said that it's one of the very few that actually teaches writing as both a business and a craft. And Anne and I worked out at the conference that I've been coming for 9 years, and I think that the two of you must have been coming for much longer.
Yeah,
Definitely.
I don't remember how many years. 15 maybe, something.
Okay.
I came, the first conference I went to was just before I'd been contracted. So I came as with a label published author, even though the book hadn't come out. So.
And this was the first it was the first one with Mills and Boon?
Yes.
Sorry, okay,
my first book with Mills and Boon, yes. Yeah, been, I don't know, 15, 16 years, something like that. Long time.
I think I'm trying to think, because I was published in 2004. There was a Langham conference.
Yes.
That was my first one, that Melbourne one there, and I don't know how many I've been to. I missed the Perth one.
Yeah.
I think that's the only one I've missed though. So. But it is an amazing community.
It is.
It really is.
Yeah.
It's I mean, I think before I got really much more involved in it and I sort of explored it more, writing is lonely. It's one of the loneliest jobs in the world because it's just you and the blank computer screen.
And a pile of doubts.
Yeah, and all of that stuff going on in the back of your head. And, these people are my water cooler. They're the people that you bitch and moan to and laugh with and get, your cheers and your critiques and whatever from. And it's so incredibly supportive and nurturing. It's an amazing thing, and I think there's so much generosity of spirit within the community.
Yeah, I think traditionally that has happened. I've tried to work it out because I know that we're unusual as far as writing communities go, and I think partly it's that we're women and women tend to cooperate. Partly that we're romance writers and that we like the positive and emphasise the positive and we like happy endings and feeling nice and all that kind of stuff. But I also think it's partly to do with the traditional publishing of romance in Australia, because for many, many years our editors and our agents and our publishers were overseas. They were in England for years, and then they were in... some people also got published in New York and in Toronto. And in all of those places, their working times are our sleeping times. So we weren't able to phone up our editor or phone up our agent or talk about any of these things. We had each other. And as well as that, as romance writers, we were fairly isolated from the rest of the Australian writing community, because what they all have in common with each other is their publishers in Australia. And it's only in recent years, since local publishers have started to publish romance, that I've actually started to meet other writers who are not romance writers but who are published in Australia. And so I think that part of the particular flavour of Romance Writer of Australia is evolved because of the tyranny of distance. So that's my point of view of it. But it's incredibly supportive. And the weird thing is, sometimes some of us only see each other in the flesh maybe once a year, but we are really good friends. And it's not the once a year friend. It's email and all that sort of stuff. We pick up where we've left off, and we are really genuinely fond of each other. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm going to pick up on something that you said there, and also something that you said a little bit earlier about when you were starting your writing journey, and they said, the only people who make money in Australia are Mills and Boon. And then we were talking a little bit about the romance community in Australia. How has the romance community, and I suppose what romance writing looks like in Australia, changed from, the only people who make money to Mills and Boon to the community that we just saw in Sydney 2 weeks ago?
It has grown enormously. I think when I first went to, and I'm just guessing here, but I think the first conference I went to, there were maybe 20 published authors, and they were from all over Australia. And they were all very well known because they were Mills and Boon authors, and they were known everywhere. These days, the whole publishing area has just exploded. I mean, there are probably 20 sort of more, there are probably 40, 50, 60 even Mills and Boon or Harlequin writers in Australia. And I think that's directly related to Romance Writers of Australia, teaching people about writing, educating them about all kinds of business sort of areas and the opportunities. And we're the ones going out there and saying, you can write, you can earn some money, this is how you do it.
But also we had successful peers, didn't we?
Yes.
We had, there was like this group of pioneering, successful Mills and Boon authors, and we were reading Australian Mills and Boon novels and going, I want to do this. So it fostered.
And that's why Mills and Boon, as opposed to Harlequin in general, has so many Australian writers, because Mills and Boon, being in London at the centre of the British Empire, was interested in stories outside of England, was interested in Australian stories. We could write our own stories as Australians, and it took a long time for the Americans and Canadians to sort of catch up with that. They used to take the bestsellers, the mega bestsellers, the Emma Darcy's and Miranda Lee's of the Australians, and republish them, but that's about all. But
if you're talking about people making a living outside of just those Mills and Boon
authors. I suppose because as you say, initially there was the 20 Mills and Boon authors, and they were writing almost exclusively for Mills and Boon, and now that's not true anymore. Now we have New York Times bestsellers, living really quiet lives here in Australia because they're not known. But
Stephanie Lawrence, Australia's first romance New York Times bestseller, started off with Mills and Boon.
That's true.
And then for a long time, there's been a kind of a glass ceiling for Australian romance writers writing contemporary romance. And for a long time, the only people who Australians writing romance who were able to break out were into single title, international single title we're talking, historicals or paranormals. That was it. Australian contemporaries still haven't broken through yet.
And we're still getting told the same story from publishers that has been there that you were talking about, which is that Americans in particular don't want to read stories
set in Australia.
That are set in Australia. Whether that's true or not, I mean, I have an American readership, but whether they're reading my stories because they're Australian or despite the fact that they're Australian, how do you know that?
See, I don't think it makes any difference. I think that it's the publishers, and it's the traditional. That's the interesting thing. Sort of with the revolution in publishing that's going on, it's the traditional publishers who are saying, "Oh no, we can't sell foreign settings," but the e-publishers are saying, "Bring it on. Let's see what people like," and the books are selling.
It's interesting actually, because I as a digital first publisher, I'm buying all Australian settings, and we are finding that readers are responding to them. But it's interesting because earlier this year I was able to attend the Romantic Times Book Lover Convention in New Orleans, which is a very big reader focused conference in the US that's held annually. And I kept hearing from readers that they didn't want to read outside of America, that they didn't feel like they would be able to relate to stories that were set outside of a city that they were familiar with, which has actually changed the way that we've marketed our books a little bit, in that we've started focusing more heavily on tropes, I suppose, or the stories that they can relate to.
The setting is second.
Exactly. So whether it's working because we're selling it, and again they're picking it up despite the setting, or because we're being a little sneaky and not telling them what the setting is on the blurb. But I think I think that that's a hiccup now. I think that in the future it's just going to.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and I the first sort of, because you do hear those stories a lot, but the Mills and Boon Harlequin put one of my books up for free for a whole year on Kindle, and it just got thousands and thousands of downloads, and that was where a lot of people came and tried the book because it was free, no barrier to entry at all, and there were a lot of reviews from people saying, I don't normally read a book set outside of America. Yeah. But I enjoyed this, or whatever. Yeah. But I don't. But no.
But.
And if it hadn't been free, they wouldn't have picked it up. And I just thought that was the first time that I really saw that concretely, that belief really concretely represented. And I thought, okay, and you've just said that people were saying it to you. Yeah,
absolutely. Which is I don't know, it's just such it's a strange thing, I think, for Australians sitting in Australia, where so much of our culture, so much of our culture is imported. And I mean. The one of the biggest sellers, and I think one of the biggest sellers.
And we travel.
Oh yeah, that's
travel.
very true.
That's the other thing. A lot of Americans don't travel outside the US.
But one of the biggest sellers for us, and certainly one of the biggest sellers in the industry at the moment, is rural romance. So that's a romance is set on the land in Australia. That real pastoral stories. Pastoral makes them sound really boring. They're not. They're fantastic, and they're everything that you want in a romance novel in these. But I wonder how much of that is also is Australians being able to read stories that make sense to them, as what to supplement the reading that they're getting from all the settings set overseas.
I think that's always been the case, because I think Mills and Boon's been quite strong in Australia, and that's where quite a few of the today's rural romance writers were. Also, Mills and Boon writers.
Absolutely.
Who've suddenly been rediscovered.
Yes.
Well, it's true. I think Mills and Boon is a very good starting sort of point for so many writers, because it teaches you, writing that short contemporary length, it teaches you to tell a really good story in a really tight fashion, and that's always got to be good for writing.
Absolutely. So what do you think is next? We're in this real publishing boom at the moment. We have so many different ways of getting your books out there, so many ways of finding your readers. The barriers between authors and readers have never been lower.
Yep.
The community is really expanded to include industry plus readers plus authors in a mosaic.
And readers are starting to hound writers to write the kind of books they want and the endings they want, and with the characters they want. That's really an interesting.
It's a little bit
development.
Of romance, choose your own adventure. This is the way I
want
the story.
Yeah, well, it's not just in romance. Sookie Stackhouse, the stuff that was happening there, and
that was a terrible
ending. But readers are getting very assertive about what they want. So
do you think that's true across the board? Is that true more, I suppose, with authors who are publishing into digital spaces, because the barriers seem to be almost non-existent in digital spaces?
But also probably more true with writers who've really fostered that strong tie with their readership as well, because they're encouraging that dialogue constantly. I get people asking me when the next book's going to be out. Well, they don't tell me what it should be about.
Yeah.
Well, there's sometimes, I suppose.
Yeah, we all get nagged. I think the fanfic thing is really, was sort of a small little hived away kind of secret thing a few years ago, and now it's kind of like wide open, and there's a lot of people sort of involved and participating and choosing and picking what they like and what they don't like, and I think that's had a huge effect on what's coming out, what's available, and I think it's flowing on into mainstream fiction like C.S. Paycat. Those books that she originally was publishing just on her blog, sort of one chapter at a time, is coming out with Penguin in the US and here, and I mean that's a male fantasy romance, and I think even 3 years ago there was no way that a company like Penguin would have touched it with a barge pole. And it's going to be huge. It's brilliant. It's absolutely. Have you read it?
No.
Oh, you have to read it.
Like the Captive Prince.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I've heard about it.
Yeah,
You've got to read
it's
it.
Sitting there, it's waiting.
Yeah. So that's just an example of something that's sort of come out of this, almost private
it's almost
playground.
a readership curated market, isn't it? In that respect, fan fiction does literally let the readership vote with its feet, and then the publishers are paying attention to what
the
floats
successful
to the top, and that's very different. They used to be picking those things all on their own. It's sort of
and so I think that's having a big effect. I have no idea where it's going to go. I don't know where I'm going to go, let alone.
I think there's a really interesting battle for eyeballs, full stop, going on.
Yeah.
It's about content, full stop. And a lot of traditional media is struggling, TV stations, print media, obviously, and radio, all of it. There's so many competing entertainment options out there for not just readers, they're people looking for entertainment, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly.
And so we're competing with more entertainment options than we ever have before. And within the realm of people who like to read or who will choose that as their first option, there is more material than there has ever have been before. So discoverability is a huge issue.
Absolutely.
As is, I think, quality. I feel like there's a little bit more discussion going on out there in the reader community at the moment about, okay, it's great that there's all these different stories and different options and fan fiction and all this stuff that maybe gatekeepers like publishers used to stop us from seeing, but there's also quality issues with maybe this could be better, or but it's gonna be interesting to see how those things shake down.
It is. Working as in publishing, it seems almost as if there's a divide between readers, and they separate themselves into two groups, as in the readers who are reading for the emotional content, and it doesn't matter. I suppose quality isn't necessary. Well, quality in
storytelling trumps craft. Put it that way.
Well, yeah, that's an excellent way of putting it. Where as long as they
get the story,
get that emotional payout, and they get the feelings that they're looking for, then that's the most important thing. Whereas, and the other group is readers that prefer to be told the story in a way that gels more with their ideas of how a story should be told. So where craft becomes more important, and you raise a really interesting question as to whether or not that's what those readers wanted all along, and they were not able to get it because, as you say, publishers were working as gatekeepers and only putting out stories that had craft and storytelling at a similar level, or whether or not they're just reading that way now because they can, because
they can, and I think also because they're free or cheap.
Yeah.
Because it's just entertainment. You can watch something on TV that you've watched 1,000 times before. If it's it's still all right, you're still doing what you're doing, and it's on.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily that you're riveted. I think there's a bit of that going on. I've met people who weren't particular readers, and they've got a Kindle now, and they're really excited because everything they've got on it's free.
Yeah.
So so I'm not particularly excited about them becoming readers.
Does the Kindle become a gateway drug?
I don't know.
I think it does.
I think it
do.
can. Yeah.
But it's like saying that libraries have been giving books away for free for years, right?
Sure.
But how many fantastic authors have I discovered
That's
through
right.
the library? And people who love books, in my experience anyway, and maybe I'm sort of
People who love
extrapolating out.
stories.
Yes. But I want to own them. If I
Yeah,
find a
that's
book
true.
that I love, I will sometimes buy it in digital and in print.
Absolutely.
And because it's good to. I just want to have them. And that's a real book lover thing. I think.
And I think it's people who love books want other people to love books.
Yeah.
And it's hard to loan
We're terrible
digital
pimps.
copies. So I often have a digital copy and a print copy, and that print copy is so that I can force it on other people to read it.
2 print copies, one for me to keep and the other one to force. Because so many of my favourite books have walked as a result of that desire to, you must read this book.
I love doing that though. If it doesn't come back, I just think that's great. Go out into the universe.
Yeah, I know, but then I want to reread it, and then it's not there, so I'm going to have to order it again. And how many times have I ordered this book?
But I love doing that as well, because I always think, I loved this book so much, I'm glad I get to pay the author several times.
Yeah.
But maybe that's a particularly
I don't like having to wait the weeks until it gets
Yeah, no, that can be very hard.
That's so true.
That can be hard.
That's why it's good to have the digital version as well.
I know.
All right, to finish up, thank you so much, both of you, for this fabulous discussion. To finish up, if you were speaking to somebody who knows nothing about romance, the romance genre, what would you like to say to them? Keep it brief. Give me your elevator pitch for romance.
There's a romance for every person around. If you haven't found a romance that you like yet, you will. Tell me what you like. I will find you a romance that you will like, a writer that you will adore. And then once you discover one fantastic writer in romance, you're off and running. There's a whole journey out there.
You're going to get the Anne Gracie certified suggestions.
Yes.
Well, I think love is universal. I think it's the thing, how many people are on dating sites, how many people want to find that connection with a special someone to share their life journey with. And these are the stories that we're telling in these books. They're emotional journeys about two people finding ways of living with each other and sharing each other's joy and sadness, and absolutely universal, so life affirming. And there's enough shit in the world. That's why I love what I do. It's about love, and I think love is the best of humanity. I really do. So
I think so too. Romance for me it's the genre of optimism. It's choosing to see the good that happens, not ignoring the bad by any stretch of the imagination, because really horrible shit happens in romance novels. But it's choosing to be hopeful.
Life goes on. We rise above it. We survive.
The genre of hope and the genre of optimism.
I actually met somebody recently who had just read one of my books for the first time, and only read it because it was me. And she knew me through a friend of a friend, and she was staying at a friend's place, and the book was there, and she read it. And she said, I loved it. And she said, it made me really happy. And I was happy for days afterwards. Is that normal? And I said, yes. If you read romance, that's the point. And that was really, because she was shocked that it made her happy. And I just thought, how many books are around that leave you gutted?
That's one of the
Why not
reasons
have
why
one
it's
that makes you
criticised.
happy?
That happy feeling is one of the reasons it's criticised as a genre, I think. Because it's that great Jodie McAllister thing about why romance is important. It does leave you feeling happy, and what's wrong with that? I don't understand why, women are constantly being criticised for being some dream-addled state off in some fantasy world. You know what? It's really hard just to get from the beginning of the day to the end of the day sometimes. Why can't you have a little pit stop along the way where you're just left with a smile on your face and the world is good and right? I'm all for it.
Being happy is a hard choice. Being happy is the unpopular choice. Being optimistic is, you're criticized for being optimistic. Being pessimistic, being cynical is
supposed to be
truthful. It's so cool and hip.
Yeah, exactly.
But how much easier is it as a writer to create a character that people are going to adore and then kill them off and have them feeling gutted? It's actually a very easy effect to have if you want to. It's so much harder to craft a really good, believable, positive, happy ending.
Yeah.
It's not.
It's not easy.
No.
So I think that's our takeaway message from this whole thing is be happy, read romance.
Be happy, read romance, yeah.
And Gracie is amazing. The very first Romance Writers of Australia conference I went to, I was writing for the Courier Mail, and I'd gone along. I didn't actually know it existed until a week beforehand, and I wrote them a very nice letter. And Anne was actually president at the time, and I said, this is what I do, and I'd like to come along to your conferences as a media. Is that okay? And I got this amazing email back because they were so excited because it was the first time anyone had ever asked.
Yes. And we were launching the Roma, the
exactly.
Romance Media Prize.
So I was able to come along, and I had just read The Perfect Rake, which is a perfect book. And it's a Regency historical that Anne Gracie wrote. And I was so nervous the whole time because I brought my copy along and I wanted to ask Anne to sign it for me. And I was so nervous the whole time because Anne was there and fabulous. And who was I? I was a little tiny, I'd accidentally stumbled into my Courier Mail job, and I'd read this book and I loved it so much. And I stalked her the whole conference. And it took me, I think, because we used to do a Sunday morning breakfast. And it took me till the Sunday morning, the conference starts on a Thursday, till the Sunday morning breakfast before I was finally able to go, hey, can you sign my book for me? And Anne was absolutely gorgeous. And that is the book that I give to anybody who expresses any interest whatsoever in historicals.
Thank you.
Because it's fabulous. Gideon remains my hero against which I measure all other heroes.
That's
Oh,
awesome.
thank you.
And what's your most recent book or your next book coming out?
This is the most recent. The Winter Bride.
Yes.
It follows on from the Autumn Bride, and the one after that, you'll never guess. It's going to be the Spring Bride.
So are these standalone books, or do you need to read them in
They're a
series?
connected series, but all of my books are standalone. Anyone can be read out of context.
Awesome.
Sarah Mayberry writes, she writes the Red books. I discovered her because she wrote the Red books. And then I found out that she also wrote other books. So I followed those along, even though they weren't red. But there was enough red content that I remained
always some red content.
very happy.
Yes.
And then I found out that she wrote for Neighbours. So I tried watching Neighbours for a little while. It didn't work out as well for me. So I just went back to reading your books.
They're beautiful books.
They are.
They're
And
just
it's,
something to sink into.
Sarah's books open doors for me because wherever I go, I've traveled quite a bit with my job. Everywhere I go, we talk about Sarah Mayberry books because everybody who reads romance loves Sarah Mayberry books.
Yeah.
So they're open doors. It's the best way to start a conversation in the romance reading community to say, oh, have you read Sarah Mayberry? Because even if they haven't, they're going to by the time you finish your conversation. And then you have something else to talk about next time you meet them.
Yeah.
So
I see that was much better than me doing that myself.
Yeah.
So what's your most recent work or your next one coming out?
I recently published a novella. It's e-only called Make Believe Wedding, and that's with Montana Born or Chill Publishing, and then the one before that is this one, which is a print-on-demand book actually, so you can get hard copy if you want, and that's called Almost a Bride. So this is a series of novellas based around a wedding giveaway in a small Montana town. So yeah.
They're lovely too. They're just beautiful.
Oh, we should mention that Sarah recently won the Romantic Book of the Year award just 2 weeks ago. And not only that, because one was not enough, she also won the Ella for Romantic Novella of the Year as well at the same ceremony. So.
Awesome. So she's definitely an author to pick up.
Definitely.
And what about you, Kate?
Well, I write for Escape Publishing. Oh, I don't write for Escape Publishing. I
You edit.
I acquire for Escape Publishing, which is Harlequin Australia's digital first imprint. So we have about 95 authors writing across every subgenre that you can think of, and a few that we've actually invented in the last 6 months. And you can find out everything you need to know on escapepublishing.com.au. Thank you so much, Anne Gracie and Sarah Mayberry.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Kate
Noemi.
Cuthbert.